Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about Track of the Bear, 1873 to 1963 by William Bixby. I have had this book for a while. I don't even really know when I got this book. I know I've had it for a while. I never opened it, and I thought this is going to be a very dry book and boring, and it wasn't. I think what motivated me to finally read more about the bear was my classmate, my buddy's book, The Best Cutters in the Best Coast Guard. I think it was the name of it. I did a review, so check that out. Really good book. The bear is a... Here it is. This is a picture of it. It's pulling another Coast Guard cutter out of the ice. It is probably, I think, the most famous cutter historically from the Coast Guard. And I think I'm 95% sure that the reason that the Bears are the mascot of the Coast Guard Academy is because of the bear. See, that's why I'm wearing my hat, Coast Guard Bears. I think. But I haven't read enough about that. It's one of those things where I feel like I heard it, but then it's like, where? I don't know. So this book turned out to be really interesting, and it crossed over lines with other books, kind of, that I have read. One of them being The Madhouse at the End of the Earth, because at one point Roald Edmondson, the guy who found the Northwest Passage, who went to the North Pole and the South Pole, needed help from the bear. The bear gave it to him. How cool is that? It's hard to describe what a big deal the bear is. The bear was built in Scotland, and it was built to be a sealer, and it was going to be run out of Canada. So in 1873, I believe, it was commissioned as a sealer. The bear, it had a couple sister ships. It was coal powered and sail powered, so it has a funnel. In the middle there, there's a funnel, and then it's sails. Obviously, these are sails. It traveled to Canada and was used for I think a few seasons. There's actually in the back of here, it talks about where it went at certain times and how it was used, who the captains were. And it looks like it was a sealer from 1874 to 1883. And then in 1884, the Navy bought it, the U.S. Navy. Why? Well, they needed a rescue. There was an expedition called the Greely Expedition that went to the polar regions for a number of reasons. It was a 25-member team, mostly Army, and it went to Greenland in 83 or 84, 1883, 1884, and then they weren't heard from. It was a ship that was going to resupply certain parts on the coast, so if they ran into any trouble, or they had to abandon their ship, or they had to go somewhere, that they could find these depots with food and supplies and shelter. But the ship that was supposed to supply that got stuck in the ice, was crushed, and then those people had to be rescued. You still had the 25-person group from the Greely expedition that were missing and hadn't been seen. And we were at a point where there weren't a lot of ships, and there wasn't necessarily a lot of interest in Arctic or Antarctic exploration in the U.S., but it was considered, they knew they had to go find these people or they were all going to die. So the Navy purchased two ships. I think it was Bear and Thetis, maybe. They were both whalers. They found them in Newfoundland and they took them over. Went to look for the Greely. The story is like exciting because it's so extreme and so treacherous. But eventually they find the campsite for Greely, and there are 6 or 7 people left out of 25, and they look like they're close to death. One guy has lost both hands and both feet, and he has a spoon attached to his hand or to his arm so he can eat. But they're very close to death. Greeley's still alive, and they're picked up by the bear and rescued. The guy that had no arms or no hands or feet, he died on the way, but they're rescued. The idea was that Bear was going to be sold back, but what ended up happening was it was transferred from the Navy to the Revenue Marine. The Revenue Marine would eventually become the Revenue Cutter Service, which in 1915 became the U.S. Coast Guard. So this has a very cool direct line to the service that I was in. So in 1885, A.A. Fenger becomes the commanding officer of Bear, and he is an officer in the U.S. Revenue Marine. And then from 1886 to 1895, the commanding officer was Michael Healy, or Hell Roarin' Mike Healy. And he was the commanding officer of Bear when it was the Revenue Marine and became the Revenue Cutter Service. Healy is a legend in the Coast Guard. Should be a legend more. Probably he's a legend in, I guess, Alaska, although I'm sure people have forgotten many things from long ago in Alaska. He's a legend. Hard charger, knew the people of Alaska. Alaska was a territory that had been purchased from Russia. Most of this book follows the life and times of the Revenue Marine, Revenue Cutter, Coast Guard Cutter Bear. And it serves until... This is what's crazy. 1885, it's transferred. It may have been 1884. 1885. It's in Coast Guard operations until 1926. What? And then it's used during World War II. So it really gets beat up because of where it is, and eventually it is sold to to become a museum in Oakland. And then Oakland, this is right as the stock market was crashing, and Oakland didn't have the funds to really support the museum. Eventually it was purchased to be a whaler again. And no, was it purchased to be a whaler? No, sorry. It was purchased by an explorer that was trying to go to Antarctica. And they had two ships. They were looking for something cheap. And the commanding officer was Jorgensen, but the guy who was leading this expedition was Richard Byrd, Admiral Richard Byrd, and it was historic. And it ended up being that of the two ships, one was more modern and metal. The wooden Bear was much more appropriate for Antarctic expedition. And so it went to Antarctica twice, proved to be the better ship there, and then was called up by the Navy to help the Greenland Patrol during the start of World War II. After that, it was decommissioned in 1944 and was purchased by a sealer who was going to use it for sealing and didn't because it was just too beat up. And it remained in, I think it was Newfoundland until 1963 when it was purchased by a man from, I think, Philadelphia, who wanted to create a museum restaurant on the Philadelphia waterfront. Purchased it, took it to be cleaned up, outfitted, and while it was being towed from Newfoundland to Philly, it took on water in a storm and it sank. So it was a anticlimactic ending for a ship that did so much. Now, for a long time in Alaska, which is the largest state now, huge territory for the United States before it became a state, some of the only federal presence was Coast Guard Cutter Bear, or Revenue Cutter Bear. The commanding officer of the Bear became a commissioner for the territory of Alaska while they were patrolling, and then they would step down while the ship went south, and then when they came back up for the next season, they would become a commissioner again. They could try people on the ship. They transferred prisoners and natives and all sorts of people over the years to different islands, different places. Lots of rescues, helping whalers and sealers survive the Arctic, especially above the Bering Sea, the Arctic Ocean. The biggest story came as the overland. It's called the Overland Expedition, which is when 3 members of Bear traveled 1,500 miles overland to help the crews of 8 iced or destroyed whale ships that were located far north and were running out of food, and some were dying of exposure. They were experiencing scurvy, but there was so much ice that ships couldn't get there to rescue them, and they were going to have to stay over for the year, and if it happened longer, there's a good chance a lot of them were going to die. So 3 officers from Bear, well, 2 officers and a doctor, officers Jarvis, Lieutenant Jarvis, Lieutenant Berthoff. These are 2 names that are big too. Their other ships were named after them. And Dr. Call led the overland expedition. They gathered reindeer to herd them over 1,500 miles in the winter in Alaska in the 1800s. No, was it 1800? I think it was 1898, 1897. I'm blanking. Sorry. Herded them for food. Now, it's interesting because a lot of the natives, in this book, Eskimos, but I know that that's probably not the politically correct term anymore. There are different tribes. This book said Eskimos. So I'll just say natives. But when I say natives, it's Eskimos, Aleutians? Is that right? Inuits. It's a whole group of, and there is differentiation in here based off of Indians from southern part of Alaska, Eskimos on the coast, Inuits further inland, out somewhere else. So it's a hard life, and there were native villages that were small, 1 or 2 huts or igloos, and in those environments the natives really lived day to day and had to find food, and a lot of times they were malnourished, could die off either from disease, the weather, exposure. They also had kind of their own cultural beliefs, and when white man would come, there was a lot of friction with people either coming looking for gold, or they're trying to escape the law, whatever. They're going north, and they would run into natives and a lot of times abuse them, possibly rape their wives, take from them, trick them. The big thing was introducing alcohol or the ability to build stills and getting them drunk, taking advantage of them that way. But there's also kind of this, I think, approach a lot of times, especially then, of we're the civilized man and we're here to tell you how to live. And it seems from this book that without an exception, the commanding officers of the Bear avoided that. They understood that dealing with the whites in Alaska was different from dealing with the natives, and I felt like they really respected the natives' point of view and their rights and their approach to things, and tried to protect them from injustices. And some of that was bringing food to them. The reason there were reindeer in Alaska was because Coast Guard cutter Bear, with another federal individual, went to Siberia and paid for a bunch of domesticated reindeer and brought them over the Bering Strait to Alaska and taught the natives how to breed and care for domesticated reindeer. So they weren't as reliant on caribou or bears or seals. I guess, or whales, but because what happened is as more people came to Alaska, the whaling and the sealing forced the whales and the seals further and further away from the coast where the natives were, and the hunting, the fur trade, and trapping forced a lot of the animals further and further inland. And in that void was left the natives that lost really a majority of their source of food. And the bear was a major part of providing food and education to those groups so they didn't starve, and was also a major part of seeking out people that supplied liquor to natives, or the supplies for creating alcohol. They would also, because there was such rampant alcoholism, the whites in the territory would sometimes offer up these one-sided trades where they would get all this fur or bone, ivory from the natives in exchange for like mead or flour, wheat, whatever, that they couldn't subside on for very long. So Bear really protected a lot of them from some of the worst parts of colonizing or populating from the outside Alaska. And I think they did a fair job of being fair to the natives in a time and a place that was oftentimes not fair to natives. And we're aware of some things, like natives couldn't have repeating rifles. Other people could. And that made hunting more difficult too. That's not the reason for it. The reason was they were like, they're savages and they're going to kill everyone if they have repeating rifles. Or they can't moderate their use of ammunition because they don't have a feel for time. Because survival is based off of the here and the now. The days change lengths because of how far north it is. There's really not a lot of reason for planning that far ahead because life is so tough in the here and now that's what they have to focus on just to survive. But there were restrictions on the native people in Alaska that were more difficult for their survival too. I talked about the overland expedition, big story there, but they rescued countless whalers and sailors and individuals and natives. They also enforced like fisheries laws against the English and Japanese and Russians that would try to poach either seals or fish from U.S. waters. Bear was just in it all the time in the North Pacific. And it was so critical and so important. It had such a long service time that it's sad that more people don't know about the Bear, because I think it is not a modern ship, but it had such an impact that it should be more well known. And the fact that it just sunk while being towed to become a restaurant, and I believe that this book was written in This book's from 1965, so a couple years after the Bear was lost. It's a tragedy because you can't go see the Bear, you can't experience the Bear, and I think it would have been so amazing to be able to do that. It went through so many transformations. I mean, it looked similar until the very end when it went out on the Greenland Patrol and they cut down the masts and added a new kind of engine and cut down the bowsprit and really prepared it for service during World War II. Where if you think about the ships that are being used in World War II, there's a good chance that Bear would have looked ancient at that point, and it was providing more of a supporting role with some of the more advanced, newer ships that were built for ice more. But Bear was reinforced for ice. It was built to work in Arctic waters, and it's been north and it's been south. It's been used in peacetime and war. It's been used for Americans and natives. It's rescued anybody that they could. It was the face of the federal government for the largest area of land, the Alaska Territory, for the U.S. And they just did so much stuff. And you really get a feel for that when you read this. I'm happy that I read it. I'm so glad I read it and really learned more about the bear. It's one of those things you wish you could be there and see it. You wish you could experience a bear because it's so important. And just like I enjoyed seeing the Constitution, the USS Constitution in Boston, or seeing the HMS Victory in Portsmouth, England, I wish the bear was somewhere where you could really experience it and touch history, because it is such a historic ship and it covered so much time. I mean, we're talking late 1800s through World War One, World War II, Spanish-American War. It was there doing its job for so long. What's weird is my ship that I was on, so if you look at the dates for this, 1885, 1884, 1885 to, say, 1926, that's about 40 years. The ship I was on was commissioned in 1964 and still works. So it's been, wait, did I say 1964? The kind of ship I was on was commissioned in 64. And the first in its class is still pumping along. That's 61 years. So it's even longer than Bear served. And Bear service seems crazy to me. But I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. It's an older book, but it's a subject matter that maybe the only update would be that they discovered where it was, where it sank, where it foundered. And that's the only thing that can really change. Everything else is historic. So awesome book. Really cool pictures too. I think it's so neat. This is a time period that you're transitioning into black and white pictures, and you do have this transition from like the old sailing ships to sail steamers, and eventually just steamers for commercial life, I guess. But Bear made that transition and then was lost. Thanks a lot, Philadelphia. But awesome book, really cool story. Thanks to Brian Runyon, who recommended or really inspired me to read more about the bear. I do have another bear book called Gales, Ice, and Men, the biography of a steam barkentine bear by Frank Weed. I haven't read it yet. I just got it in the mail, and that was recommended by Brian too. He read both of these. He was reading them at the same time, so I think he had a little trouble differentiating between what he enjoyed about each one, but I will read this later. Thanks for being here today and learning a little bit about the bear. Go Bears! And Revenue Cutter Service, the Revenue Marine. It's short time with the Navy and some of that bloody time with sealing, and it's sad. And if only we could enjoy the bear today. The bear, there is a 270-foot Coast Guard cutter, WMEC 901, that carries on the bear's name, Coast Guard cutter Bear, today. Those ships were from the 90s, I believe, the 270s, and so the bear name is carried on. The commanding officer for the bear currently is a guy that graduated a year ahead of me at the Coast Guard Academy. So people I know are starting to be old enough to command these ships. But what a line of commanding officers from Bear, too. Some of these people are legendary. Berthoff became the first commandant. He was a captain commandant of the Coast Guard, first commandant of the Coast Guard. Really defended the Coast Guard against kind of encroachment from the Navy. And there's a ship named after Berthoff. There's a ship named after Jarvis. There have been various ships named after different people from Bear who went on in a small service to have other important positions, including the Healy. Healy is a 420-foot icebreaker out of Seattle, Washington, the largest ship that the Coast Guard currently has. So thanks for being here today. I will talk to you later. Have a good one.